Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Soulful Hunter podcast. I am your host, Johnny Mack. Through this podcast, I am on a mission to transform lives through primal adventure and to spread my mission of mentorship as conservation. This podcast is powered by Washington Backcountry, a resource for all hunters new and old. To find out more about Washington Backcountry, go to wabackcountry.com or search for Washington Backcountry on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Soulful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack. Today we have a wonderful guest and the creator and founder of Purpose Mountain, Tim Corcoran. Tim here is joining us to talk about purpose in life, passion, and how it all relates to the bigger picture and how we're all connected. In the Soulful Hunter podcast, we are all about finding ourselves and transforming our lives through the primal adventure of what hunting can provide for yourself. And so I got to hear Tim on an Aubrey Marcus podcast that he did a while back. And I was like, dude, you are lined up exactly with my mission and what I believe and my views. And so I had to reach out to Tim and say, you got to get on this episode, get on a podcast with me. And we are fortunate enough to have Tim join us today. So Tim, thanks for coming on.
Oh, it's great to be here, Johnny. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. You are an amazing individual, and after reading a lot of your material and diving into who you are and what you do, I was inspired. So for the listeners who do not know what Purpose Mountain is and what it is that you are all about, can you give a little background?
Yeah, absolutely. So Purpose Mountain is my newest offering out into the world. It's really an expression of the deep calling I feel in my own heart, right? An expression of my own purpose, which is in large part to help people connect to why they're here, why they took birth on planet Earth, to remind folks that it's not just a mistake, it's not a random thing, that we're all alive, that each of us has a unique gift to share with the world, and that the best way, one of the very best ways, and probably most forgotten ways to reconnect with that purpose is through connecting with nature.
Yeah, that is probably the biggest thing and most often forgotten in society nowadays, with how the constant buzz of everything is going on, that people, they forget who they are and they have no true self-identity.
Exactly. Yeah, it's rampant in our, as humankind has progressed through the millennia. We have constantly sought out greater levels of comfort, of security, of safety, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's come at a great cost now, as we've forgotten the depths of who we are. And so that's just such a huge part of why I'm alive, what my calling is to help people reconnect to that in an efficient way and in a beautiful way, to help not only themselves as individuals, but to discover what they have to offer the rest of the world, the earth itself, other human beings, all of what comprises our world.
Yeah. It's so interesting to hear about purpose and reason for being and all that things. And just like how our bodies need food and water and energy to be able to live, we also truly need purpose. We need to know why we're here in order to live an existence that is fulfilling to ourselves. So where did you really go into figuring out? So before Purpose Mountain, what were you doing, and where did this become such a huge aspect and proponent of your life that you wanted to share with the world?
Oh yeah, well that's a rich story. So in addition to being the founder and director of Purpose Mountain, I'm an ambitious guy. I'm also the founder and director of Twin Eagles Wilderness School, located here in Sandpoint, Idaho, in my home. And my wife and I, Janine Tidwell and I, founded Twin Eagles Wilderness School back in 2005. And so, backing up even further, for me, Johnny, I'm 45, right? I grew up in the 80s in the Midwest in Indiana. I did not grow up hunting. I didn't grow up with a particularly strong connection to nature, although back then being in nature was way more common than it is today, right? We had 3 TV channels and there was maybe one good show a week on. And
Yeah.
okay, other than that, what were we doing? We were outside every day, every afternoon, every evening, until our parents called us back in, playing in the woods, right? Messing around, just being outside. And that, of course, is increasingly uncommon these days. But, back then, I've always had a rich connection to nature. I've always had an affinity for it. I've always found peace and solace and something deeper, right? I mean, I remember being a kid. I don't know how it was for you, but I remember being a kid, right? And I remember being so fully alive and always going for some new adventure or learning something new. I mean, life was meant to be lived, right? And whether it was playing or even at school learning something new or interacting, I mean, I wanted and I did live fully. And what I would see as I looked to the adults around me, especially in Midwest, Indiana in the 80s, because it was a pretty sleepy community. I saw a bunch of adults that did not seem fully alive to me. Yeah. I saw people, kind of going through the days as if it didn't matter, and that essence of life wasn't present. I mean, no one was talking about this. It was just something I felt in my experience. But I really wondered. I was like, is this all there is? Is this what's waiting for me? When I become an adult,
right? There's got to be something more to life than just like 9 to 5 and the grind and all that.
The whole thing. And so I always felt that. And it's great, actually. I've been thinking about this little quote. I want to just do a little pause here and share this quote with you. This one is, I don't know if you're familiar with Lawrence Vanderpost, but he shared a little quote here. This is going to help frame our conversation here. He says that the Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert talk about the two hungers in life, and that there is a great hunger and a little hunger, and that it's the little hunger that wants the food for the belly, the basic survival needs. But the great hunger, this is the greatest hunger of them all, is the hunger for meaning. And he says there's ultimately only one thing that makes human beings deeply and profoundly bitter, and that's to have thrust upon them a life with no meaning. That there is nothing wrong in searching for happiness, but of far more comfort to the soul is something greater than happiness or unhappiness, one way or the other. That is meaning, because meaning transfigures and transforms all. Once what you're doing has for you meaning, it's irrelevant whether you're happy or unhappy, because you are content. You are not alone in your spirit. You belong.
Man, I'll tell you, that just hits home. When you read that quote to me, this is what I'm thinking. I picture the will to survive and how it doesn't matter whether it's food or water. Like if someone has the will to survive, they're going to survive. Exactly. They're going to see it through. Like the guy in 27 hours that got his arm stuck.
Yes, exactly.
When he was, spelunking and all that stuff. It's like, dude, if you want to survive, the human spirit and will is greater than anything. And this is where the purpose comes into play.
That's right. And so for me, Johnny, as a boy, I felt that. I felt everyone kind of going after that little hunger. And I didn't see anyone around me going after the great hunger, the hunger for purpose and meaning. And it really threw me off, because somewhere inside I knew that I wondered, and I think I knew deep down inside, there must be something greater. There must be some greater purpose to my life and to all life. And so I took a big journey, that involved all kinds of phases. But mostly I played by the rules until, through grade school, through high school, through college. And then it was in college. I actually I went to Purdue University and back in Indiana, and I had a history professor who was part Lakota Indian, and he was teaching. This is in early '90s, early mid '90s, and he was teaching a history course, an advanced history course that was really kind of in disguise, like an introduction to earth-based spirituality or shamanism, as some people might call it. And he opened my mind and my spirit in ways I could have never imagined. I mean, he was a first true mentor and introduced me to concepts, indigenous concept like mitakuye oyasin, the Lakota phrase that means, it is my burning desire in my heart to know and connect with all things. The idea of synchronicity, that there is a greater purpose to life, and that when we follow the the seemingly unexplainable coincidences, that they are not coincidences at all, but that they're guiding us towards our greater path. And, after a childhood and, the first 20 years of my life playing by the rules, by the end of college, I said, I'm done. I know it's not kosher. I know it's not the normal thing to do, but I'm going to live this life the way I want to, God damn it. And I don't know where it's going to go, but I'm not going to be that guy in that cubicle, for the next 60 years. Yeah. And so I did. So after college, literally the day I graduated, well, it was 2 days after I graduated, I rather than going down the route of, okay, the classic job, the 9 to 5 or whatever, I took a big road trip and plopped myself in the middle of the Navajo Indian Reservation in Arizona. I had one tiny connection with a friend who worked out there, and sought. I intuitively knew that the Native American people had a deeper connection to purpose and nature, and I was yearning for that in my own life. And so I just went there, which was a crazy move, right? I mean, who does that? Nobody.
Right. How old were you at the time?
So that was right out of college. I was 22.
Yeah.
I was 22, a total idealist, didn't know what I was doing, I thought there were buffalo and teepees down in Arizona. Of course, I was way off. Totally naive, and I wound up living there for about a year and a half and searching for this deeper connection. And, of course, what I found outwardly at first was, a lot of people who were, striving for a more modern lifestyle. And there were hints of the old traditional ways, there were hints of something deeper, but it seemed to be kind of hidden. It seemed to be inaccessible to me. And so I tried following these routes, and I couldn't, those doors never quite opened for me.
Yeah.
It was funny because I was working at, I was working at the utility company because I'd graduated in computer science. I kind of had my awakening mid-college, and by that point I was halfway through my degree towards computers, which just came easy to me. Kind of funny for a guy now who's dedicated his life to purpose and wilderness. And so rather than start over, get some degree in wildlife biology or something, I said, I'm gonna wrap this up and live life on my own terms. So I did. Like I said, I graduated college and got the degree in computer science, and that was just a little, foot in the door for the job. But what I found, after a year and a half, because it was tough, there were the people were not most Navajo people didn't speak to me. I felt growing up as a white male, privilege. We didn't even really use that terminology back then, but I was used to, just the opposite. I was used to, being the one who's, got everything going for me. And so being in an indigenous community where I'm like the only white guy around, or maybe one or two for every few hundred, that's a different experience. That's a different experience. And so anyhow, long story short, after a year and a half of giving myself and really earnestly working to connect with these people and searching for a deeper spiritual connection, but kind of outwardly feeling like I hadn't found it, when it was time to, when I wrapped things up, I'd actually fallen in love with the woman who's now my wife, with Janine, and she was in Oregon and I was in Arizona. I said, okay, I gave this my best shot. It didn't quite work out the way I thought, and so I'm going to move on. And well, on that last day there at my job, they wind up throwing a party for me, a surprise party, and they bring me up to this big conference room. I open the door, and here's every single 100 people every single person who worked there gathered in my honor. And there's a giant cake, and it says, "Farewell, Tim." And I'm like, what in the heck? Like, this is making no sense at all. I didn't think these people barely, noticed me. they're not barely giving me the time of day. What is this big send-off? And they had all lined up, and they come up one by one, and everyone honored me and gave me a blessing and shared some words with me. And there were lots of gifts. And, I was really confused. I'm like, what is going on? This is not making sense here. And finally, one of the women there, older women who I made somewhat of a connection with, she came up and she said, I can tell you're confused right now, aren't you? I said, yeah, I am. I don't know what's going on. She said, well, ever since you've come, we haven't connected. We haven't expressed much to you because of the patterns of our ancestors, because it was, your ancestors that took a major toll on ours. And there's a deep wound there. And so it's our way to not express much to your people. But nonetheless, through this 18 months that you've been here, you've worked your way into our hearts. There was a guy who came up and he said to me, I never thought there was such a thing as a good white person until I met you. And I'm just,
wow.
Oh my God, like I didn't mean to do that. I was just being myself here, Yeah. And so this woman, she says, so this is our way of honoring you, and this is actually our way of asking you to stay. And I was like, oh my gosh. And one of the elders came up and they honored me and they gave me a traditional set of moccasins and tied my hair in the traditional Navajo tie. And I was like, I couldn't believe this is all happening. And to the extent that the woman actually sent a big handwritten letter to Janine, who up in Oregon, my wife now, asking her, petitioning her to come down. But Janine had her own thing going up in Oregon. And so I said, no. So I did wind up leaving. And what I learned, Johnny, was that, I learned about the power of my own heart. I learned that although I was searching outwardly, kind of superficially for the old ways, the old primitive skills, brain tanning and friction fire, things like that. And I didn't so much find that, or deeper yet, I was searching for, a deep connection to spirit. And I was probably pretty superficially oriented at that time, if I'm honest about it, right? I was looking for the ceremonies and all this,
Yeah, something tangible to really hold on to.
Exactly. And that didn't come my way. But what I found was that, wow, as a young man, I had an ability to impact these people with my heart. And that was one of the most important life lessons. And all these years later, that was half of a life ago. I'm 45 now. I was 22 at the time.
Just through your ways of being, who you are.
I had no training. I was just being myself. What I discovered was that power of my own heart. And all these years later, I've maybe achieved some level of outward success and outwardly moved forward on my spiritual path and my own vision, my own purpose. But I've got to say, that basic lesson of being a good human being, being good-hearted and sharing and yearning for something greater, and sharing that with others, that is a big part of the essence of who we are and who I am as a human being. And if I can live my life in that way and continue to, just be a good human being, be a good-hearted human being, and take on practices that help me connect with that and bring that kind of love and care and appreciation and respect and honor to everybody who's in front of me, whether they're somebody I've got up on a pedestal or not, then maybe I'm living my purpose, right? Because maybe living our purpose is just about who we're being in each moment to moment. It's so easy for us here in the United States to think of the word purpose, and so many people immediately, unconsciously associate that with, okay, well, what's my goal? It's a goal-oriented thing. My purpose is to be a wilderness outfitter. My purpose is to start a school and to succeed with it. My purpose is to start a podcast and have this, outward success. And yet what I've learned and I've been very blessed and very thankful to have many other indigenous mentors and earth-based teachers through the years. What I've learned is that the most important part of living a life of purpose is just simply about who we're being moment to moment.
Yeah.
So that was, I think, one of my early lessons on that teaching.
That's pretty powerful. So when I first started my website about a year ago, one of the first articles I wrote on it was Hunting Answers the Call to Fulfill Our Need for Spiritual Health. So I'm a physical education and health teacher in a middle school over here in Washington. And I always talk about the 6 aspects of health and, talk about spiritual aspect. And a lot of people get confused and associate that with like religion or going to church. And ultimately it's about finding your passion,
Yes.
Being healthy and feeling fulfilled in what you do day in and day out, and your connection with everyone else. And, if it's your creator or you don't believe in a creator, it's your connection back to the earth or to the universe, the world.
Beautiful. And it's, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, so when being a PE teacher, a lot of people are like, man, that's like the ultimate job, man. You just roll out a ball and you got summers off. And I'm like, dude, yeah, but that's not what I do, and that's not good teaching. But even with being a good teacher, I ultimately wasn't being fulfilled. And even though I was impacting lives and every day, what I was doing in the classroom and in the gym, I felt empty. And it wasn't until I became fully engulfed into hunting and realized the transformative power through what the primal adventure is, that it gave me the purpose to learn and sharpen myself, and then to sharpen myself even more by giving and teaching to others. And what I learned is that life is all about giving, and ultimately when you are closing the circle of life by receiving and then passing it on and giving, that is when you really start to find the purpose and passion in what you do. And for some people, it is, just being kind to others. And that's ultimately what we're called to do, is love and be kind to others. But really, it for me, it was like, dude, I have to be at peace with my own soul before I can give and truly feed into other people's lives the way I am supposed to and the way they need me to. And if I didn't get to the wilderness, I wasn't being calmed and renewed.
Absolutely. No, I mean, some really important points there, Here's another quote I think you'll like. This is a short one. Let's see if I can find it here. This is from Frederick Buechner, who's a theologian. Most folks have not heard of him, but he speaks about purpose as this. He says, one's purpose is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. Right? So one's purpose is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet.
Yeah.
And so just as you're saying, Johnny, it's not enough to be focused on ourselves. We've got to, transcend beyond this self-centered interest. Is the self important? Yes. Do we have to take care of ourselves? Absolutely. Are our needs a vital part of this life? Definitely. But does it end there? No way. And we will never find that deep meaning, that deep sense of purpose, if we're only focused on ourselves. By definition, as far as I'm concerned, purpose means a purpose beyond self.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Is it more fun to cook a meal for yourself and keep yourself alive, or cook a meal for an entire family?
That's right. Right?
It's
beautiful.
When you get to share those moments with everyone else and help others thrive that we really are fulfilled and be like, man, this is awesome. We got to do this more often.
Yeah. And just as you're saying, following one's purpose, it is an ongoing process. It's not like, we have a moment and we discover our purpose, then boom, we're done, and then we go live it. I mean, to walk with purpose is a practice. It's an ongoing thing. It's just like, I don't go hunting once and then check, I'm done. It's an ongoing practice, right? And so, I love the simple test, the old deathbed, exercise where, okay, if I were to die right now, and be there on my deathbed, looking back at my life, how would I feel about how I've lived? Or, assuming I'm going to live a long life, hopefully I do, imagining myself on that deathbed, looking back, have I lived fully? Have I given it everything I got? And if this is the only chance, I don't know how it goes. What happens to us after I die? I don't know. There's lots of different theories, but I know that this life is precious, and this is an amazing opportunity we have, and every day is a gift. And so, can I look back at my life and say, yes, what I'm doing right now, right here, today, this moment, that this brings me full aliveness, and this is the greatest expression of who I am. And so it does go in chapters, right? I mean, for me, after that whole journey with the Navajo, I wound up discovering wilderness survival skills and the deep nature connection mentoring movement, largely through the work of Tom Brown Jr., the Tracker School, and then John Young and his organizations. And that set me on fire, man. I mean, I was 24, right? And I don't know. Are you familiar at all with Tom Brown Jr.'s books?
I am not, but I'm
Okay.
gonna have to take a look into him after this.
Yeah, he's someone to check out. I mean, I read his books, and he's got an amazing story of being raised from and influenced, mentored at the age of 7 for 10 years by an old Apache scout and medicine man by the name of Stalking Wolf. And in his books, Tom spoke about two things. I was about 24, 25. I connected with Janine. This is post Navajo years for me. And I was reading his books, and he brought forward two things that really spoke to me deeply. One was this idea of wilderness survival, right? That a human being is capable of walking through the wilderness and getting their basic needs of shelter, water, fire, and food met directly from the natural world. Mm-hmm. And for me at the time, right, 24, 25, I mean, I'm a young man. I'm thinking about like maybe in a few years getting married, and like I might become a dad one day, and like I had this archetypal need to be provider, right? And this ties in, right, big time with the hunting thing. And I'm like, and I didn't have any training in that. I mean, I didn't. I mean, I was dependent on homes and grocery stores and roadway systems and telecommunication systems just to get the basics met, right? This is just like to live. And I thought, this is so weird. How the hell is it that I've gotten 25 years into my life, and society has not trained me in the basics? Okay, I mean, I've gone through grade school and I've got a degree in college, but I can't just walk out there and get my needs met. And in these stories of Stalking Wolf, it was this amazing story. This guy was a master at wilderness survival, and he could go anywhere and get his needs met. And I was like, man, this is calling deeply to my soul. But then even deeper was this idea of a vision quest, right? This idea that one of the most powerful ways to discover who we really are, why we're really here, our purpose, our vision in life, is to enact the old ceremony of the vision quest, which is, traditionally would have been 4 days and nights alone in the wilderness, fasting from all things familiar with one single prayer or one single intention, which is, why am I here? And just putting it on the line and saying, all right. I mean, some people call it like the great timeout in life, when we're going to pause and say, all right, I'm making a stand and I'm not moving forward until I can feel like I've got a connection to that, to the answer to that question. And I knew, man, I'll tell you what, as soon as I that was introduced to me, I was like, okay, this is me. I'll do whatever it takes. Yeah. And so at 25, my Janine, my partner, and I at the time, we traveled out to New Jersey, of all places, which is where Tom's school was. Took courses, and it changed my life. I mean, we learned how to make shelters primitive, but we learned how to make fire by friction. We learned the plants you could eat and the medicinal plants, and we learned wildlife tracking, and he introduced us to some, traditional earth-based ceremonies, the sweat lodge and others. And I knew that week, I was like, this is a huge part of why I'm here. And I just decided that week, I'm like, this is it. I'm going to make a living doing this stuff. And so I didn't know how. I was like, I'm not quite sure how this is going to work out. Are people going to pay me to track animals? And then it kind of clicked. I thought of my mom, who had told me, from a young age, Tim, you're such a natural teacher and such a natural mentor. And I said, oh, I'm going to learn this stuff as good as I possibly. I'm going to give everything I've got to this. I'm going to master these skills to the best of my ability, and then I'm going to share it with others. Because in that single week, I mean, I can't tell you, Johnny, how transformed I was. I felt so connected. I felt so at peace in myself. I felt so whole. I felt it was like all of the gaps that I grew up with, living and growing up in the modern world. It's like they all got filled for me. Like, granted, it was just a week, and I was a young, impressionable 20-something, right? But I'll tell you what, it fed my soul in a way like nothing else. And so,
man, you bring up so much stuff that I want to talk about. I feel like we could sit down and record a podcast over a weekend, just to, like, all the information we could talk about. So I'm going to go a little bit of a different avenue, and then bring it back to what you said about, connecting yourself to the spirit and all that. Is, in the Old Testament, I come from a Protestant background, but even for, the Jewish faith and all that stuff, the Old Testament talks about there's a guy in the Bible who wrestles with God. and he wrestles with them until he gets the answer that he wants. And the whole concept, going back to like the spiritual side of it and away from like religion context, is that if you want an answer, you got to be willing to fight for that answer.
Yes.
You got to know what you want first, and you got to go through the fire to then be transformed. And when you get that answer, then you're able to continue going. And also what brought me this visual picture of like our human spirit being aligned with, if you put, God or heaven or a creator or whatever it is above us and the earth below us, you got to be able to connect the dot as one single straight line from our creator all the way to the creation.
That's right.
Through our feet to the ground and what it provides. And it's an amazing thing. It's so hard to live life without going through this. And you also mentioned about you can go through the wilderness, and wilderness can provide you with everything you need to survive.
Yep.
And you have this call upon your soul to be a provider. And that is why I am trying to recruit people to pick up arms and become hunters, is because your life will be transformed through that primal adventure, because we all have this calling to provide. And what that provision is for others is ultimately you just giving. Yes. You loving. We are called to love mankind, and being able to feed ourselves and have the skills to feed others is ultimately you just showing someone love.
Hallelujah.
Right?
Absolutely, man. Hallelujah. Love it.
That's what I'm trying to do. And this is why I stand on the box of mentorship as conservation, because if you wouldn't have had someone teach you, and if you wouldn't have read books about someone who had mentors, then all this different stuff would die with the souls of these people. Yes. But the conservation through mentorship allows this to live on and to continue to give, feed, and love others, and ultimately provide protection for the wild places in this country and in this world that we need to be able to find ourselves.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. I mean, and gosh, there's so many threads now that are opening up here. I know.
It's like, where do we go?
Yeah, exactly. Well, mentoring is huge, right? I mean, just that one alone. So what I discovered first through that part Native American professor I had, then through just a couple relationships there on the Navajo reservation, and then a much more rich expression of mentoring once I got involved in the Deep Nature Connection and Wilderness School movement. I mean, I had a numerous mentors who were mentored themselves, who took me on. The good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, I had all my issues and all my wounds and everything else that were unprocessed. And they showed up for me, right? They got to know me. They challenged me. They believed that I was more capable than I was currently expressing. And they held that vision for me, and they helped me through the tough moments. I mean, we're talking day in, day out for years. I was in a 5-year traditional mentoring relationship at the Wilderness School. We wound up joining in Vermont. Through that, we were really blessed to meet a number of other Native American elders from a few different tribes. And granted, I mean, I was wrestling with God. I was pouring my passion into, all of these relationships, and my mentors saw that, and so they wanted to invest in me. Why? Because I was putting the effort in. Right. And as a mentor myself, that's the biggest thing I look for now is, okay, if I'm going to take you on, if I'm going to really mentor you, I want to know you've got the heart, you've got the passion, and you've got the commitment. I don't need you to be.
You don't want to cast your pearls to swine.
Well, exactly. And I don't need people to be perfect. I mean, so many people come to me and they're like, oh, I'm not worthy, or I've got all these issues. That's not the issue. Look, we all have that. The question is just, are you going to be able to stand the heat of the fire when things get hot? Because if you're on this journey, if you really want to know why you're here, if you really want to connect with nature, whether that's through hunting or what have you, it's going to push your edge. It's going to be hard. There's going to be moments when it's tough. When you don't feel happy, as that first quote I mentioned talked about. And so do you have that connection? Do you have that drive to go through the heat of the fire. And if you do, that combined with mentoring, oh my God. I really believe this, that anything is possible for us when we come together, when we can find mentors and when we give all of who we are to what's in front of us. So then the question becomes, how do I pick my path? Is it hunting? Is it nature connection? Is it something else? Whatever. And it almost doesn't matter what it is, but what's important and big part of my message is I want people out there to ask those big questions, whether it's through a vision quest or what have you, or there's numerous other ways. Why am I here? And when you honestly connect with that and feel rooted in something greater than just yourself, because it transcends the ego, it transcends the self.
Absolutely.
And that's the foundation. That's what can get you up in the morning, day in, day out, and have you feeling good about what you're giving yourself to.
Yeah. You can't make progress without action.
No.
You have to take action to get gains in life.
And if you're on that spiritual path, if you're on that deep path, we can assume that those actions will take a deep level of courage. Because by nature, we are human beings meant to grow. And as we move forward on the path of life, if we're not growing, if we're not kind of riding that edge of our comfort zone, then we're not fully alive. That's where growth comes from. And, we don't have to be crazy hardcore about it. There's time for rest and rejuvenation and all of that. But on the whole, an individual walking a path of purpose is a person who's willing and committed to be courageous, to push their edges, to be uncomfortable. And ultimately, I think what's at the heart of that is that they're willing to be vulnerable.
Oh, man. Tim, you're getting me all jacked up right now. I don't even know what to say. There's so much that we could talk about, whether it's vulnerability or these different things. I think one of the biggest, man, it's hard to even collect my thoughts on this because you just got me so fired up.
Well, how about this one? Let me keep going just a bit, okay?
Okay.
So vulnerability. Okay, let's start physical, okay? This is something I think our listeners can connect with. You go out there and you're hunting, right? Okay, it's cold or it's hot or you have to sit there patiently for minutes, hours, days on end until the shot presents itself, right? Now that isn't hunting. The physical experience of hunting is by definition a vulnerable experience. It is way more comfortable, come on folks, let's admit it, to sit on the couch and eat Cheetos and watch Netflix.
Yeah.
So why do we do it? Well, because there's a payoff, and we know there is that moment of connection. So maybe it's just a simple thing like watching a butterfly move by, or even if we don't get the shot, wow, we get to watch beautiful herd of elk pass by in the dawn sunlight, or maybe it's that big moment where the deer presents himself to us, and we take that shot, and there's that deep, intense, beyond words to express. Feeling of expression, of connection. And so but what does it require? It requires us to be vulnerable, to put ourselves out there. And then what's the payoff? So the cost is vulnerability. That's what we pay. What do we get? We get connection. We feel connected with nature. We feel connected with ourselves. We feel connected with our soul.
Yeah. And ultimately, if you're in a group or you have a mentor or you have a community in which supports you in this, you get connected with them even more as well.
That's right. Oh, yeah. Right. Think about your brothers and sisters, metaphorically or otherwise, that you go hunting with. Those connections are lifelong. Come on. Our hunting buddies are those are our soul friends, right?
Absolutely.
I had an old mentor who had a quote. He used to say, "Those who roam the wilderness together shall become as kin." And, I think that just hits the nail on the head. And so, but that process of, that basic process of the cost it being vulnerability and then the payoff being connection, that applies to the spiritual realm as well. So what is the spiritual vulnerability? The spiritual vulnerability is I'm willing to be with the tension of the question, what is my purpose? Why am I really here?
Right.
And I'm willing to even if I've made connection with that in the past, right? I'm willing to re-ask that question, beginner's mind, go back to it. And then what's the payoff? The payoff is finding that connection and then being able to express that.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's ultimately like breaking it down into a quote in which people might be more familiar with is with no risk, there's no reward.
Yes.
The risk is that you got to be vulnerable and to put yourself in a position of discomfort
Yeah.
to get the reward of connection, of purpose, of passion, and food, and all of that goes along with it.
It's huge. It's so huge. Or just think about it in terms of relationships, right? It's like, if I want to connect with you, what's going to do that? Well, if I can express a bit of my vulnerability, if I can open up a little bit, and you don't have to go crazy, but to take that risk, right? Oh, then you realize, oh gosh, you feel that way too. Oh my gosh. Well, then you open up, and back and forth it goes, and before we know it, we've got a friendship, And so, it's such a big piece these days, especially for us guys, because what's the old rhetoric, we've got to be tough and real men don't cry and all that BS, and yet we're all searching for this deep connection and yearning for that.
It's extremely ironic, isn't it?
Oh my God, it's crazy.
One of the things that you talked about, which I speak about quite often, is that the first known quality of a human being is courage. Mm-hmm. And without courage, nothing else is going to get accomplished. And going back to the vulnerability piece, it takes courage to allow your walls to come down and be vulnerable and to experience the possibility of pain, heartache, just different emotions in life that could hurt or make us feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's, it's overused, but the old teaching about courage, right? Courage is not the absence of fear, but courage is being willing to face our fears, feel them, and move forward anyway.
Oh man,
and
so
move forward anyway. Yeah.
So just for our listeners who are listening to this podcast, you actually don't even hunt.
No,
you used to, or you have, or
I am a
talk
hunter.
a little bit about this.
Yeah, no, I am a hunter. So I didn't grow up hunting, and I felt really drawn towards, the spiritual side of connecting with nature. And then I got involved with the wilderness survival. And then, just a short version of that story was, I gave it, my wife and I both gave it everything we had for 5 years, Johnny, and learned to become mentors. I've mastered those skills. After a couple of years, I put myself out on survival adventures where I'd go out with nothing and make fire and build primitive shelters and find wild edible foods and get clean water, all from the wilderness. And then I did the whole Vision Quest thing, and that's a whole other story. But finding my purpose that way, and all along, I felt very drawn to the hunt. And for me, I just kind of intuitively knew. Again, not growing up with it, but I intuitively knew. I said, "There's something powerful here." And actually, rewinding a bit, when I was a boy, I had the BB gun, and I did have a moment where, I was 10 years old or something, and the classic moment, right? And what happens? Mm-hmm. I see the robin in the backyard, and I go out kind of like, target shooting, and I aim at that robin, and I pull the trigger, and then boom, down it goes, and its body's shaking, and it freaked me out, right? This is a pretty classic story, a lot of us share. And I walk up to it, and I'm watching this robin's body quiver, and as its life is leaving its body, and with kind of one last shake, there it is, it's gone. And I'll tell you what, something happened to me in that moment. And I had no mentors. I felt ashamed, to be honest with you. I didn't want to tell my mom or dad. I didn't want to tell my buddies, and so I just kind of kept it to myself. And I wasn't able to process it, but I knew something powerful, sacred had happened. And I felt bad that I had taken its life. And, as a 10-year-old boy, I was kind of half in my imagination anyway. So I wasn't fully conscious of the fact that, hey, I might kill this being if I pull this trigger. Well, so fast forward all these years later, and this idea of the hunt, and my path is really unique in that, I'd gone out and experienced full-on survival. Multiple times I've been out for weeks and weeks of primitive wilderness survival experiences, but none of those had involved hunting, right? Until I think it was, let's see. No, it was actually, I'm mistaken. It was my second survival. So survival adventure. And so these were big deals, right? I would spend like a year preparing for these things. I would work on bow and drill friction fire making and master it. I would work on building primitive shelters just using sticks and barks and grasses and master that. I'd learn the wild edible medicinal plants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And hunting was always kind of like the pinnacle. And I thought, well, I'm going out for a few days or maybe a week or maybe 10 days, but I don't really need to kill an animal or a bird. I can get by with wild edible plants or whatnot. But after a couple of those experiences, I was really yearning for that deeper connection that only hunting and taking a life can bring. And so I had an experience where I was going out on a survival adventure with 3 of my buddies, and we had built a primitive shelter, and we had gotten fire, and we had found a spring for water, and we made fire with the bow and drill. Just not even a knife, right? I mean, I was flint knapping quartzite rocks using those to carve a friction fire kit. I mean, these are skills that take some time. I mean, this was years in the making, and one of my buddies, Kevin, got really sick, and we weren't sure why, but he was complaining about his hunger, and so we intuitively knew that the guy needed some meat. And our intention was to have a big, long, I think 10-day survival adventure. And we were just a few days in. And so we said, all right, we need to get this guy meat. Now, we didn't have rifles. We didn't even have bow and arrows. We literally were walking into the woods with nothing. And so one of the simplest hunting methods is the throwing stick. You just grab an arm-sized stick and you throw it at an animal. And so
sounds simple enough.
This is as simple as it gets, right? And so we had passed by a wetland on the way up, and we went back down the mountain and to this wetland and gotten ourselves all covered in mud for camouflage and snuck in. And here's this family of mallard ducks, right? And there's the mom and the juveniles. They weren't babies. They were, I don't know, maybe half grown. And so me and my 2 other buddies, were on this quest. Okay, now we've got to get meat for our buddy Kevin who needs it. And so we jump out of the bushes, and each of us with 2 throwing sticks and launch the sticks. Of course, they all miss, and the ducks go flying everywhere. Some go down under the water. It's total chaos. Oh my God, what? And the 3 of us, it was just a small pond, maybe, I don't know, 20-foot diameter. And so the 3 of us kind of triangulate around the pond instinctively, because some of the ducks went down. Well, Mom had left, and there were just a few ducks underwater, and they pop up, and in the chaos, 2 more get away. Now there's 1 left in this pond. I'm like, all right, and things kind of settle out. And what it was doing was it would dive down. Maybe you've seen this, and then it would travel underwater for, I don't know, 10 feet or so. And they're really hard to track when they're doing that. But if you pay close attention, you can see those tiny waves on the surface of the water. Right. And so we're tracking it. We're noticing that it keeps going to the points between where 2 of us are standing. So if you can imagine that triangle surrounding the circular pond, it kept going between us, trying for an exit. And every time it would do that, we'd realize we'd rotate. So one of us were there, and then it would turn around. And we kind of got in this pattern, this little game back and forth that kept trying to find an exit. We kept, closing the door. But in the process, opening up a new one, and then it would go over there. And so after like 10 minutes of this, when you're out there in a survival situation like this, granted it was self-imposed, so it wasn't a true one, you do cultivate a deeper connection to instinct and intuition, and hunters know this. And so I had a moment where my intuition kicks in. Well, there was a little rock in the middle or close to the middle of the pond, and my intuition was telling me, hey, go over there. Now, logically, it didn't make sense, because if I did that, it was going to leave a big opening that my other 2 buddies couldn't close. But I followed my instinct. I followed my intuition. So I go to this rock, and amazingly, the duckling comes right to me and pops up in arm's reach. And without even thinking, what happens? My hand goes down. I grab this thing and twist its neck.
Wow.
And now this was my second hunt of my life. The first one at 10 years old with the robin and the BB gun. But this is my first conscious hunt, right? Mm-hmm. And what happens in that moment? This is a moment I think all hunters can relate to. I was absolutely thrilled. I was so stoked. I was so joyful. I was so excited that I had succeeded in my quest of getting meat. And simultaneously, paradoxically, I was like grief stricken. I was so sad that I had just taken this young life, and my emotions were just this mix of joy and sadness, like battling it out, But it wasn't really a battle. It was just they were just there, right? I mean, there I was happy and I was sad all at the same time. And so I had a moment, I said a few words in my own way. I gave thanks. And what was so wild was my buddies, I forgot to say this, the moment I jumped out on that rock, they both yelled at me. They're like, no, because they knew, it was going against logic. And yet I had to follow that intuition. And sure enough, it pays off. So we bring the meat back up and Kevin gets it. And we gave it all to him. And he, sure enough, that was enough to turn the tide for him. And he felt much better. And we continued on with our adventure. But that, you asked about hunting, that was kind of my initiation, so to speak, into the world of hunting. And I'm honestly so glad it was what it was, because it was even more primitive than a stick, right? It was my bare hands.
Yeah.
And
you went straight to the root.
I don't think it gets much more
no, not at all.
That, Yeah. So anyhow, long story short, after that, I had a big yearning for to be a primitive archer hunter, right? To hunt with a bow and arrow that I've made myself, and being into primitive skills, being a boyer and making your own bow and arrow. I mean, those are skills that I began to work on, but that's a huge, huge process, both learning to make the bow and the arrow. And actually it's the arrow that's more difficult because it's the arrow that's flying, right? That's what's got to be perfect.
Right.
And then even once you get that figured out, which was years in the making, then it's mastering the art of archery with a primitive kit, with a self bow. And even then, you're talking max, I mean, maybe 10, 15 yards. As far as
you got to get close in order to even use it.
It's a journey. Well, so that was up against the rest of my life path, which involves starting a wilderness school and becoming a father and getting married. And I prioritized those other things over the primitive archery hunt. And so while that was in my heart for a lot of years, I didn't wind up going after it because my purpose, my vision was guiding me elsewhere. And so it was about, 7-8 years ago, my boys were getting a little older. I was like, man, I really want to have hunting be a part of my life. And with all my other commitments, it's just, it was impractical for me to keep going on that dream of the primitive hunt. And so I said, okay, this is it. And so I actually approached a Native American friend of mine and asked him if he would mentor me in hunting with a rifle. And, I bought my first rifle. I got like a Tika 270, which is an awesome weapon. Mm-hmm. And through that, Johnny, I did practice it in a sacred manner, as taught to me by my Native American teachers, and it was with a gun, And okay, I didn't get that first deer with a bow and arrow I made myself, but I honored the old ways, and that was, like I said, 6-7 years ago, and every year since then, I brought home a deer. And
man, that's special.
Oh man, I'll tell you what. And it's, it's a different deal when you haven't grown up hunting, right? And it's not an automatic thing. I mean, that is a big, big wall to get over. And granted, most of it's in our head, but that's a big wall. But I guess that's a part of my message too for folks out there is, hey, it is possible, and you can approach people and you make friends, and you can ask to find a mentor, and people will teach, and share what they know.
It's the purpose behind all and everything that I do. I didn't start hunting until I was 29, 30 years old. I'm currently 35, and this is the journey. So one of the things I want to ask you is, you teach survival, you teach purpose, you teach finding yourself. Mm-hmm. How do you correlate and connect the dots between hunter recruitment and the need for that to fulfill your soul and to transform your lives through the primal adventure? How do you go about the non-hunter, connecting them with the purpose, connecting them with hunting, and then ultimately closing the loop and recruiting them into becoming hunters?
Yeah, well, that's a big question, right? And I think it's unique for all of us. Some people feel really drawn towards hunting, others don't. I work with a lot of people that feel really drawn towards nature, but don't necessarily feel drawn towards hunting. And and the opposite. I also work with people who feel really drawn towards hunting, but they're not so much into, the nature connection. They want to hunt. And what I've learned is just adaptability and resiliency and flexibility, right? That, my take is that underneath all of that, so some sort of basic connection with the natural world and some sort of basic connection with why we're here, with our vision, with our purpose is essential to us as human beings. That's my belief, right? Just like there's the modern theory of attachment in modern psychology, this basic idea that as babies, we need a living connection with our parents, especially our mothers. And if we don't have that, there's going to be significant consequences, in the rest of our lives. Similarly, my belief, Johnny, is that each of us have a basic fundamental human need to be connected with the earth, with the planet on which we live, as we also have that basic fundamental need for a connection with, whatever we want to call it, our soul, our spirit, our vision, our purpose, why we're here. Yep. And that if any of those are missing, we're going to struggle. We're going to struggle. Yeah. So how do I approach it? That's kind of my ultimate MO. I'll be honest, is connecting people with those things. And sometimes that includes hunting, and other times it doesn't. And so I'm less attached to the specifics than I am, those deeper goals.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like the old tribal responsibilities, right? Not everyone was a hunter.
Correct.
Everyone had their own responsibility. But what our job is, or at least my specific job is, and anyone who currently hunts and wants to hunt, is that we need to find the people who are meant to be hunters and get them hunting.
Exactly. And so what I find is because I run a wilderness school, I got a lot of people coming to me saying, hey, I just want to connect with nature. And after a couple years of deep connection with nature, they hit that same spot I hit, which is, okay, I've connected with nature. I've learned some, and I keep it practical. I've learned some survival skills. I've learned some plants. I've learned some tracking, but I'm ready. It's almost an archetypal journey that I think is really reflective of our development as human beings. You look back even to our ancestors, and kids didn't start hunting. They started just learning, connecting with the basics of nature. And once you have that basic connection to nature, you understand the difference between a raccoon track and a coyote track, and you can identify poisonous versus edible plants, et cetera, et cetera. It's only natural that you're going to want to say, okay, how do I now bring some of that back to feed myself and my people? So that pattern plays out. And so I see lots of people, it typically takes them a year or two of nature connection, and then they naturally want to experience hunting.
See, it's the gateway drug to the natural high.
There you go.
Right?
I love it.
You just got to get out there, and all of a sudden you're going to get addicted, and you're going to be like, wow, this is awesome. How can I get more immersed in nature? Well, it is going from being an observer to a participant.
Yes, beautifully said. I love it, that we are participants. We're not separate from nature. And when a person hunts, or again, even if it's just, learning to gather wild plants, you feel yourself as part of the natural world. And good God, speaking to the choir here, of course, but especially in our world where everything we get is prepackaged and we're so disconnected from our basic needs, when a person makes that journey, my God, it is so empowering, and they feel so connected because for the first time, they're actually providing for themselves or their family.
Bingo.
What could be better than that?
Right? When you give, whether you're giving to yourself or giving to others, and you give life, it is the ultimate fulfillment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we could go on for days, and I think, obviously, Tim, we're going to need to have you on for another episode or two.
Awesome. Yeah.
We could chat forever. What are some closing thoughts that you want to share, or something that really hit home with you in regards to what you do, what you want to get across, and what you want to leave with listeners?
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. And it's such a rich conversation and rich connection here, Johnny. It's such a pleasure to connect with you here. I guess in closing, for this time around, I guess what I would offer people is, just recapping those 2 points, that my belief is that inherently as human beings, we have an in the same way that we need, you know, to eat food or to drink clean water or to have a warm, dry shelter. These are basic ongoing needs for us as human beings. And if you live without these for any bit of time, some more than others, you're going to pay a price. You're going to suffer. And so what I would offer is that connection to nature and connection to purpose are equally important. And that many of the afflictions, the sufferings, the challenges of the modern life experience are due to the fact that largely those two pieces, connection to nature and connection to purpose, are missing from our lives. And that when we bring those on board, good things happen to us and our families. And so, you know, and I would offer, I mean, because I will say this, I do know hunters who are richly connected with nature, but do not have that deeper soul connection, and they struggle, you know. And I've worked with people. I mean, I've had some of those people come to me and say, you know, I've got this connection, I love nature, but man, there is something deeper missing, and then they need some guidance and mentoring, and I help them out, you know.
I think that's one of the things in the hunting world where it talks about like old traditional truck hunters versus the backcountry hunter.
Sure.
You know, there's something about finding yourself when you're out in the wilderness.
That's right. And just to say, so these are skills that can be learned. They're not unlike riding a bike or learning to shoot a rifle or play the piano. Like, these are skills that can be learned, and it's really helpful to find people who have that connection already. I mean, that's the essence of mentoring. You know, I found that, and people helped me out, and that's a part of why I'm here now, and part of why you're here. You know, is we have this responsibility to pass on what we know. So that's what I would offer, you know, is that I really would encourage people to just look deep within themselves and kind of take inventory. You know, how are those basic needs getting met? And if there's deeper struggles going on, psychological or emotional or otherwise, to just start to connect those dots and say, well, maybe there's something I can do for myself to help myself out here.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you're starting to feel empty or hopeless or just some type of stirring in your soul, it's time to take to the hills.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I love
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, you did a great job today. Tim, how can people get a hold of you? How can they get connected with your wilderness school and with Purpose Mountain and all that?
Yeah. Great. So if folks are interested, I'd love to connect further. So folks, check out my website. I've actually got two. So my work at Purpose Mountain, if people are interested in that, you know, bigger question of how do I find my purpose, it's www.purposemountain.com, just like it says, www.purposemountain.com. And I've got a free, you know, download on there people can grab. It's a simple purpose discovery kit, and it's got some great exercises about going out into the natural world and some mentoring,
which I love, by the way.
Oh, cool!
I went through it myself. Yeah, so
that's great. And then from there, I've got different offerings. And then if people are interested more in connecting with nature and connecting with the wilderness, people can check out my wilderness school. It's www.twineagles, TWINEAGLES.org. And again, we've got some free resources on there people can check out, and then a variety of programs for adults and kids to take a look.
Now, is that something that's more like a weekend thing, or is it seasonal?
No, so we run programs year-round for adults and youth, and we do everything from, you know, short little after-school programs for kids to full-on 10-day wilderness immersion retreats for adults. So lots of different options there.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
I love it. One of the things that I wanted to talk with you just before we end this is your concept in your Purpose Mountain catalog that you sent out was, what is soul?
Oh, yeah.
And soul's one's true nature, how it belongs to you as well as it belongs to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is something very important for hunters to use as an advocacy towards non-hunters or people who are anti-killing of animals, is the concept that we all have souls, and it doesn't just belong to you, it belongs to the world, and we're all interconnected. So even though you are taking the life of an animal, ultimately you're giving to another life, and through that, there's harmony.
Yes. Yeah. Beautiful. So, you know, it's a really important topic, and it's a beautiful one to kind of wrap up on. So absolutely, we are all connected. And now, I mean, science has straight up proven it. It's what indigenous wisdom has told us for millennia. And when we slow down and connect with nature, it's what we experience, right? And so our soul is our essence. Our soul is our unique place, like our niche in the world. It's a combination of our gifts and those gifts being expressed. And absolutely, all of life requires life to go on. Death is a part of life, period. We hunters know this. And if we're going to live, something has to die. And, for me, I don't differentiate whether that something is a dandelion leaf or a great bull elk.
And that is something that is important to know.
Huge. All life has value. And who am I to say that ant is less important than that buffalo? Give me a break. It's not my place to say. But I know that I've got to take that life if I'm going to live. And so the question is not about avoiding taking life. The question is, how do I take life in a good way? How do I honor it? How do I feel right with myself at the end of the day, at the end of my life, knowing that I've lived this life in a good way and left something good behind? That's being a soulful hunter in my book.
Woo! Preach it, brother. Let's go. Welcome to the Soulful Hunter podcast, everyone.
There we go. There we go.
I want to say 2 quotes that I took out of your brochure for Purpose Mountain and leave it with all the listeners, because when I read these, I was like, yes, someone else gets it. And one is from Mark Twain and the other is from John Muir. So from Mark Twain, the 2 most important days in your life are the day you are born and the day you find out why. And that is beautiful. When we get the purpose and we get to live with our soul and we get connected with our creator in the universe. It sets our soul on fire and our lives are transformed.
Yeah, exactly.
And then with what John Muir said, and into the forest I go to lose my mind and find my soul. To be calm, to be still, and to know yourself and know your creator.
Yeah.
Life transformation right there.
Whew. What would our world be like if everybody lived by those quotes, huh?
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Just pause for a second. Take it in. Take a deep breath. Allow that oxygen to fill your lungs and be alive. There's beauty in that.
Beautiful.
Tim, thank you so much for joining us today. You are an amazing man, and you're changing the world. And hopefully through this episode that multiple lives are touched and people are willing to dive into knowing who they are and what their purpose is, and that lives are transformed.
Well, you are sure welcome, Johnny. It's such a pleasure connecting with you. And I got to say thank you. I mean, thanks for taking the courage to create this podcast, to broadcast your message and, bring those of us of like minds and like hearts together so that we can have an impact. So yeah, absolutely my pleasure.
Hey, my pleasure. Stay soulful.
That's right.
That's what it's all about.
Yes, sir.
All right, Tim, thanks for joining us today.
All right. Thanks, Johnny.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, I'd love it if you could go ahead and give this a rating as well as subscribe. Also, you can check us out on Instagram under the Soulful Hunter Podcast. Make sure to tag us in pictures and posts and use the hashtag Soulful Hunter. To find out more about the Soulful Hunter Podcast, go to soulfulhunter.com and be sure to follow the podcast as we are going to be bringing you a lot of great information, insight, and changing lives through primal adventure. I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Stay tuned and stay soulful.